Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 411. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to help support and inspire new trauma workers through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. Thanks so much for joining me today, and here we go. All right, folks, before we get started here for this month of December, I'm revisiting some episodes that I just love, and actually more specifically, the people I love. This one is most recent episode with Laura Brown. She was on the podcast back a while, and then I had brought her back. And man, you know, when you listen to this interview with her, when you listen to her, she just, and I say this in the interview, she just resonates with this authenticity and her being herself. And she talks about kind of shutting down her practice in a sense, and the way she manages the terminations with her clients. And she talks about not even using that language, but how she handles these relationships and the effect that this has on those clients. It's so powerful. And I think if you're, whatever stage you're at in therapy or coaching or whatever, I think this is just a great inspiration and lesson and reminder of what is the crucial element in this work. And by this work, I mean working with people who've been impacted by trauma. So Laura Brown, just one of those incredible, inspiring people. I'm so honored to get to speak with her and have spoken with her. So enjoy this one. All right. Take care. All right, guys, I just want to say that I am thrilled to have this podcast sponsored by CPTSD Foundation.org. A little while ago, I actually got to meet the founder, Adena Moberg of CPTSD Foundation. We met here in San Francisco, sat down, had breakfast, and it was amazing. I got to feel and see her passion, the passion that she has for this work, and not just for therapists and clinicians, but survivors as well. CPTSD Foundation provides peer-led support and adjunctive care in between therapy sessions for survivors of complex trauma. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, survivors can come together to give and receive support and validation and feel equipped with the knowledge and skills they can use every day. You can check it out at CPTSD Foundation.org. Their website is amazing. They have daily recovery support. They have free support groups. They have a healing book club. And Trauma Therapist Podcast listeners can get 50% off the first month when they join the daily recovery support calls. You can check that out by going to cptsdfoundation.org/Trauma Therapist Podcast. Once again, that's cptsdfoundation.org/Trauma Therapist Podcast. Or just head on over to the website at traumatherapistpodcast.com and click on the link there, and you'll be in business. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Project. Very excited to have Laura Brown back as a guest. Laura, welcome.
It's so good to be here, Guy. Thanks for asking me back.
You're welcome. So as some of you might remember, Laura was a guest back on episode 61 of the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Laura Brown is a feminist trauma psychologist who retired from psychotherapy practice in December of 2018, though she still continues to offer supervision and consultation as well as forensic psychology services. Laura lives in Seattle and has published extensively on topics related to trauma treatment, feminist practice, cultural competence, ethics, and LGBT concerns. She's a founder and past director of the Fremont Community Therapy Project, training clinic that is no longer, though it was serving low-income individuals. Laura's second popular press book is titled Not the Price of Admission, Healthy Relationships After Childhood Trauma. Awesome. Again, welcome. And I didn't mention in there, but I just wanted to say congratulations on earning your black belt in Aikido.
Thank you. I mean, for me, that's a bigger accomplishment than my doctorate, frankly, because it was so much harder.
Talk about why Aikido, what that experience was like for you.
Well, in many ways, because I work with trauma, and Aikido is about creating harmonious connections and relationships and the resolution of conflict, I found that it's a martial art that I really have been able to integrate into my understanding of working with people. Part of my black belt exam, in fact, was to show how I used Aikido techniques in working with trauma survivors in embodied ways, which is not new to me. Other people have been doing that for a long time, but I really began to integrate it pretty thoroughly, and still on the mat, am interested in how do we heal people through this martial art.
So, if you don't mind, just take a couple seconds and say a little bit more about what that looked like for maybe the listeners who aren't too familiar with Aikido. I actually that was part of my curriculum at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. So I was fortunate enough to have study some Aikido. But for those listeners who aren't, what did that look like? You said as part of your black belt exam, you had to show what that looked like when working with trauma clients.
So there's a technique in Aikido where somebody kind of grabs you from behind, and you have to free yourself without harming you or them, called Ushiro. And when you're doing it standing still, someone comes up behind you and they grab you. And a lot of childhood trauma survivors, when they're approached, they freeze. They learn to freeze and collapse at a really early age because they were in utterly helpless situations of terror. And so I've used that technique with some of my clients. I always ask permission and do a lot of talking about what it's about first. And so I have them first entrap me, really strongly hold my hands behind my back, by my wrists, and I demonstrate how by shifting my center and connecting to their center, that I can free myself without struggle, without any harm to anyone, that I can move, that I can be alive instead of entrapped. And then I'll have people try that. And just the experience of discovering that when someone's got you, your choices are not simply freeze and collapse, that you can feel your body moving into your center. You can feel yourself connecting to the other person rather than being terrified by them. And through connecting to them, through harmonious resolution of the conflict, becoming more fully alive. So that was one of the things I demonstrated during my black belt exam.
Wow, I love that. I mean, what a great metaphor for working with trauma, and I think that's pretty powerful. So, I wanted to invite you back here because there's just something about you. I don't think it's one thing, but for me, you just kind of resonate an honesty, a truth, kind of a searing honesty and truth that I think is so, and a directness, an authenticity that is so powerful within the context of trauma and working with trauma. That's what I loved about talking with you. And I was like, you're welcome. And this is what I want to bring to this podcast. And so I was like, yes, So anyway, having said that, so a number of changes and shifts in your life. Where do we start? Where would you like to start?
Well, that's really related to what happened during the year I was closing my practice. So in the fall of 2017, I began to notice that I wasn't always loving going to work. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'll take a year sabbatical. And I did a lot of consultation and a lot of reflection and realized that I wanted to end my practice as I had done my practice, which is loving what I did and not getting to a place where I resented or disengaged. And so in December of 2017 and January of 2018, I told one by one every single one of my clients that I was going to stop being a therapist on December 20th of 2018. And that I wanted us to end our work together as we had done our work together. And part of what every single one of them told me made it work was that I was completely transparent and engaged with them around how I had come to that decision. I was honest and open about the fact that I was struggling with staying engaged and present, and I didn't want that struggle to be a part of our work, that I knew this was hard for them, that I invited and embraced their anger and their resentment and all of the things that showed up for them. I acknowledged that this was not a way that I was giving them power, that this was a choice I was making for myself. In other words, we did this year of ending, and everyone stayed for the entire year. And many of my colleagues said, "Oh, yeah, everyone's going to drop out. You're not." I said, "I don't think so."
Wow.
And everyone stayed until that last week of December of my work. And what everyone said to me as we were ending is, what made this work is that you were always Laura. You were always authentic and present and genuine and direct. And yes, all these other therapy things happened. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing was that you showed up as you, and you modeled for us that a person could be fully human. Mm-hmm. And that would be okay. And I think to myself, I wish I really got that, but I could certainly do it in my work. And so this piece that you're telling me you're drawn to was what every single one of these amazing survivors of the child from hell said to me in that process of having a change in our relationship. I never used the word termination because that feels deadly, but I did talk about change, that I will carry them with me and they will carry me with them. We simply won't be meeting in person. Mm-hmm. And so that process of finishing a complex trauma practice has been so interesting and enlightening for me.
So two things come to mind here. One is, can you be more specific on, why you stopped, what was going on for you? And then after that, I want to talk more about you and you being yourself and how you got there and what that meant for you. But let's start off with, if you could, why did you stop or feel you needed to stop?
Well, I think there's a couple of different components. So one of them has frankly been health. I'm in my middle 60s. Some of the warranties on some of the parts of my body have been wearing out pretty thoroughly. I mean, we're only warranted till 40 by evolution, and then after that, things break down. So I've had some interesting health crises, and I am doing really well. For a person with my interesting health issues, I am pretty darn healthy and very active, on the mat regularly, and it changed my energy level. I would come home from the end of a workday and have nothing left for myself or anyone. Mm-hmm. And that was a change, and I didn't like it. So there was that piece. There's the piece that I was wanting to do more traveling while I was healthy enough to do that, to see parts of the world that are challenging to my body, because of heat, because of pollution, places I hadn't been able to be before. And I wanted to do that before I couldn't do that. And I was noticing that I was not getting to do that as much as I wanted to. And then there was the piece where I wasn't feeling joy going to work every day. Many days, yes. And some days it's like, oh my God, I have to go down to the office. Mm-hmm. I had not felt that before. Mm-hmm. And I was seeing it occurring with sufficient frequency that I looked at it and said, what am I trying to tell myself? So I had all of those variables going on in the fall of 2017. We were fleeing from the smoke of the West Coast fires and went down to the Oregon coast for a few weeks. I had a lot of time to sit with myself and look at those things. I have known people who kept on working past their pull date. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to be one of those folks. I had promised myself early in my career I wasn't going to be one of those folks. And I didn't want to work up to my pull date. And I think my pull date is probably 2 or 3 years down the road. I didn't want to get there. I wanted to stay as interested, as loving it, as connected as I had always been. I didn't want to take the risk that I would predict poorly and not be able to end well.
And just to be clear, so you still are offering supervision and consultation?
Yes, I still do probably 3 days a month of supervision and consultation individually. Mm-hmm. So I'm still doing, the random forensic cases that come my way. And that's different energetically.
Right.
Like today I did a full day of consultation, and I noticed at the end of the day I felt energized.
Mm-hmm.
It's different to carry people so closely on my heart.
Yeah.
And that's what I do with the folks I've worked with. And because all of them had not just issues of abandonment, they had been abandoned, they had been neglected, they had been made secondary to the adults who had harmed them so terribly. I wanted us to change and end in a way that wasn't a trauma reenactment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that, and just to hear you talk about how that process unfolded for you and with your clients is, I think it's pretty amazing. It's very hopeful. This whole, and it's interesting too that, I kind of was drawn to that one quality that seemed to, they point out too, what, that, I don't even know if it's a quality, but the way you are, just be, they said you being you never stopped just being yourself and being human. And talk more about that. Were you just that way? Did that just come with you? Because that, to me, Laura, for me, it when I first started, when I got into graduate school, even before I got in, I knew I wanted to I was drawn to trauma and working within this context. And yet for me, it was not about that at all. It was all about, what knowledge do I need, quote unquote knowledge, what books do I need to read, workshops and articles that's going to do it for me. It wasn't that I didn't honor myself, but I didn't really get that bit of the importance of that and the integration of that. So what was that process like for you?
So I was talking about this yesterday with one of the people I consult to, who is coming to embrace precisely the therapist she is. And I had this aha, and I said, when I got started, being a feminist therapist was incredibly radical and out there. There was simply no way I could practice from my developing theory and conform and be acceptable. I was just going to be out there. And so I had to figure out how to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to fit and that I wanted to do this work very well because I have such a strong moral and ethical sense of commitment to the people with whom I've worked. And I think that was freeing because I wasn't part of a lineage of how to behave correctly in psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece, frankly, were some of my role models. I think I've mentioned this before, that the great Gestalt therapist, Irv Polster and the late Miriam Polster, were my next door neighbors when I was a kid in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And they were some of the most free adults that I knew. I was at their house quite a bit because they had a daughter who was a month younger than I am. And so I got to see what it was like being these fully alive adults who didn't seem to be particularly afraid of anything. And Irv had his practice in the house. So there was a combination of, we had to make not too much noise, but also there was this vibrant thing happening there. And I had a model of psychotherapists who were completely themselves, because when you would watch a tape, when I would watch a tape of Irv or Miriam doing their thing, they were my next door neighbors. They were recognizable as Sarah and Adam's parents.
Wow.
And so I had that. And then I have my family motto, which is don't be a sheep and follow the flock. We were trained to be you might say oppositional, perhaps independent, depends upon who you're talking to.
Yeah.
But really, it was a combination of all of those factors that came together, and for which I'm grateful.
And so, what did that look like for you? What did that look like? That inspiration to be free in yourself. What did that look like, and what might have it looked like had you if you weren't that way, for example?
The second question's a lot harder, because I guess let me try to answer that one, because that's intriguing to me. I look at colleagues of mine who have taken a long time to free themselves and realize what the research says, which is that most of what happens in therapy is about the relationship. My dear friend and colleague John Norcross has this beautiful pie chart, which shows that if you look at the outcome of psychotherapy, 8% is the thing you do. 40% is who knows, but the other 52% is in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think most of us get trained that we need to do this evidence-based practice from the manual exactly right and keep ourselves out of it or else. And it takes years for people to recover from that miseducation. We want to have the evidence-based practice, although, the evidence for them, having reviewed a lot of it, is that it works really well with people whose intersectional identities are mostly from the dominant culture, but there's big dropouts, particularly people of color, people who are sexual minorities, people who are anywhere on the margin of society, but the relationship matters enormously. And so I think what would have happened is I would not have been as interesting a therapist. I would not have done either the really good work I've done or the not so good work I've done, because I made lots of missteps along the way figuring this out, because I didn't know what I was doing. Like I think a lot of my generation of trauma therapists, I certainly would not have felt free to develop the theory I developed, because I would have been operating within the constraints of somebody else's model of what psychotherapy was about. Mm-hmm. So I see that in particularly some of my junior colleagues whose consultant I am, who are recovering from their graduate training. And that one of the things I can do is remind them that here is the research, that the relationship and the person of the psychotherapist count for more than any of the alphabet soup of evidence-based interventions possibly count. Because I don't care what you do, it's only 8%. Mm-hmm. And I think somewhere in that 40% of WTF are other relational variables that we haven't been able to identify yet.
Right. When we talk about the relationship, of course, one of the obviously that's comprised of the therapist, and mm-hmm. Being present and cultivating presence and cultivating authenticity and vulnerability and compassion. Did it get to a point where you had to kind of get in there and say, okay, I've got to, or I want to, or how do I be Laura? Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can reveal this facet of me or my personality. That's got to be kept shut. The whole process of getting in there and just like exhaling and relaxing is very fascinating to me. What did the actual, the machinations look like? And I know maybe this is hard to articulate, but
yeah, what
was that process for you like?
Well, I think part of it, frankly, was getting older enough to stop caring what people thought about me. So there was a big piece of it that was removing the internal critic and knowing really clearly, and this is important, this is not say do anything, this is not free for all. This is knowing really clearly what is for the client and what is for the therapy. And so paying attention to the intentional or unintentional experiments that I did. There were all kinds of unintentional experiments where I would do or say something and then notice what happened and later reflect on it and think, huh. Or the client would come back in. I mean, my favorite example of that, a long time ago, so I used to have a therapy dog named Shmulik, who has not been with me for a decade now. He was a very attuned little critter. And one day, this well-trained dog climbed up on the back of the couch and peed down the back of the couch onto the client. And I calmly said, Shmulik, you didn't ask me to go out, and said to the client, here, let me get you some things to clean up with and send me the dry cleaning bill for the clothes. Shmu, let's go out so you can take care of the rest of that outside. So we did that. Came back in, finished the therapy session. She came back the next week and said, boy, your dog is really intuitive. I said, what do you mean? She said, I needed to see what you would do with a badly behaved child.
Oh, man.
Somehow I intuitively knew that the right thing to do, this is not someone whose mother had tried to kill her more than a few times when she was a kid. I just, okay, I need to respond the way I would respond, which is not yell at the dog or rub its nose in things, but be calm and compassionate. All right, that was a useful data point. Just people need to see how I am with their humanity. So how do I create more space for people to bring their humanity into the office? For example, I don't think I would have done the experiment on purpose. It's not like I said to Shmulik, hey, what we're doing this session, get out.
Right.
Yeah. So it was experiments that were serendipitous, where I paid attention. When Shmulik died, and everybody knew him. He was at the office every day, and being transparent in my grief and making space for people to talk about what did it mean to grieve and lose and not want to die. And I think, again, experiments because life created opportunities, because something would happen in the therapy. Because I've written about this, my unconscious comes to me as a series of songs. It's like I've got a jukebox in my head, that something would show up from the jukebox, and I'd say, can we talk about this? I'm having this niggling notion that perhaps this is going on. Doing the experiment of listening to that jukebox in the first place, instead of treating it as random distractions. So, in Gestalt therapy, which is really the only model I trained very much in back in the day, we talk about, doing experiments, doing behavioral experiments. And so for me, it's been paying attention to those experiments and to how they're helpful for the therapy and for the client. Because if it doesn't hit that criterion, then forget about it. Sometimes I've had bright ideas that really fell on their face thoroughly. And usually the ones that I wasn't so attached to were the ones where I thought, pay attention to this.
And so, I mean, just to be clear here, we're obviously not talking about entering into this context and relationship with free abandonment and,
right.
Obviously there are ethical boundaries and so forth. And at the same time, you're obviously not talking about disregarding or discarding everything the knowledge you have about trauma. So, and herein lies the art of this work, right? So what is that it's a tightrope in a sense, isn't it? Is it not?
It's a tightrope or a maze. It's what it is you have to understand the effects of trauma on mind and body and spirit. You have to have a theory of what could be healing. You have to have a curiosity about, in this relationship with this particular person, because there is no generic trauma survivor. If you've met one trauma survivor, you've met one trauma survivor. So in the relationship with this person, how do you apply the knowledge that you have with this person in a way that collaborates with the healing process that they've been trying to initiate their whole life? And yeah, you have to have that knowledge. You have to understand the biopsychosocial consequences of trauma exposure. You have to understand developmental and cognitive psychology. You have to understand things that are helpful to people. If I didn't know how to do EMDR, I would have lost so many opportunities with folks. All of those things are true. And if this person doesn't have a relationship with you that is a disruption of trauma reenactments, if you don't have one that acknowledges this human being in the room, then you can have all that other cognitive knowledge, and it's not going to help you or the people you work with as much as you want it to. It won't do nothing, but it won't do what I think most of us want to do.
What do you say to the therapists who are starting out on this trauma-informed journey, in a sense, learning? What do you say to those who are like, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable, so really comfortable doing that. I feel hesitant about being myself, or maybe they're not even conscious of that, right? What do you say or suggest to them?
Well, first of all, I say I'm glad you're uncomfortable, because if you were too comfortable with this, and I'm never too comfortable with this, if you were too comfortable with this, I'd be worried, because you would be much too interested in your own comfort. And part of why I love Aikido is that it has always required me to be uncomfortable and stretch myself in ways that I've always asked the people I work with to do. So don't be too comfortable with it. Don't be frightened of yourself. There's a reason why you're a therapist. There's a reason why you're drawn to working with trauma. There's something about who you are and what you bring that allows you to be with the terrible pain, with the powerful emotion, with the details no one wants to listen to. There's something about you that's already doing this. Because not everybody wants to do this. Not everybody wants to sit and listen to this or be present with that degree of depth of despair and distress. Something about you's already there. So, how do you cultivate that part of you? With supervision and consultation, with your own mindfulness practice, with your own psychotherapy. How do you cultivate those capacities so that you trust them enough to bring them into the room, so that you notice when they're showing up in the room despite your best efforts to behave, and then something interesting happens? Because really, I was trying to behave because I only want to do well by people. I don't want to do harm. I have a strong commitment to doing it well. And so I was really uncomfortable. And one of the people I was finishing with this year, who I had seen since the late 80s, was talking about the fact that in our first couple of years of working together, I was still pretty over-controlled and not myself and not genuine, and that harmed her. I did her harm. And she actually went away for a few years and then came back. And we repaired. But she had to go back and talk about how painful it was for her, that I was deeply not genuine with her because I was fearful. And the fact that I could honestly talk about that in the subsequent years was what repaired that rupture and allowed it to heal. So my fearfulness, my attempts to behave, to do it right, harmed this person because it created a trauma reenactment for her. There's ways to be ethical and have clarity of boundaries, and yet the flexibility of boundaries that are necessary in working with trauma, and also show up as your full self open-heartedly.
Man.
That's what I would say. That's what I say to the people who consult with me.
Yeah, that is, I think that's just so powerful. One of the things, that happened to me, and I think the reason why this particular specific topic just resonates with me is because I felt when I was, in graduate school, and I just was anything but genuine. Again, I just felt like, I had my clinical hat on, just tipped, just ever so slightly, and my briefcase full of interventions, tucked under my arm. And, then I went to graduate school and I got out and I got this job and 1 year, 2 year, 3 years of experience, 4 years of experience. And then, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but one of the big straw, in a sense, was when I was at work and I got this call that my mom died, like unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. And it just devastated me. It was like right out of the blue. I was at work. I was like, all right, I took some time off from work, I think about a week or so. And I was like, all right, I'm ready to go back. I went back to work. I was in session and I was working with this young client who, unbeknownst to them, in my situation, they started talking about a death in their family, and that just somatically jacked me up and flooded me, unlike anything I'd ever felt. And I was like, I need to get out, and I need to take more time off. And Laura, after that time off again, when I came back, something had shifted in me. I felt a lot of what you were talking about. I just felt like I didn't need to prove anything. Like I didn't need to do anything. And I just felt like I had exhaled. And there was a certain freedom in that. There was a self-trust in that. It was I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me within the clinical context.
And I think that's part of what we're talking about, that we don't want to be reckless ever. We want to be as attuned as we are able to what creates safe enough space for the people with whom we work. And we want to be the human in the room with them. Because they were wounded by humans. And, Chris Courtois talks about this, that you have to have relational healing for relational wounds. You have to have an attention to attachment for people whose trauma has been at the nexus of attachment. And it's hard to do that when you're anxiously checking yourself all the time. If you want to have anxious attachment with your clients, you can do that. But it won't be healing.
Well, I think, my God, I think it'd be an amazing supervisor and consultant. Jeez, let me just take a pause here and just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Laura Brown. Recently, she stopped doing private practice, but she is continuing to offer supervision and consultation. How do people access that, Laura? How do people find out about what's going on for you?
They email me and say, I would like to do consultation with you. And then we fire up our video conferencing software and do that.
Okay.
Because I've consulted with people all over the place. They don't have to be in Seattle. My website has information about where I'm teaching, although the next 2 teaching gigs I have are in Israel and the Czech Republic. So that's a little far to travel.
Wow.
But I'm trying to keep my website updated with things that I'm doing, so that when I'm offering classes or I have a new publication, that's there. But really, if someone is interested in doing supervision or consultation, and I don't do supervision for people for licensure at a distance, because if you're pre-licensure, I need to be very hands-on. I can only do that with people who can, come into the office with me. But other than that, do it on a one-time basis when somebody has a particular thing coming up, on a routine basis with folks. Because I've been a therapist for a really long time. I've been in practice for 40 years in private practice. I did my very first client session in the summer of 1971 when I was working as a psych tech in a psychiatric hospital. So I've been at it for a little while. And that's doing that kind of mentoring and collaborating with people on their professional development, something I really love to do. So that's how people do it, is they email me and we fire up the video conferencing software.
So I'll have your website listed up here at the show notes at the traumatherapistpodcast.com, and as well as your email, laurabrownphd@gmail.com. Before we head out, I want to mention and maybe have you talk about your book here titled Your Turn for Care, Surviving the Aging and Death of, no, not I'm sorry. What's the most recent book?
The most recent book.
Not The Price of Admission.
Not The Price of Admission.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to write that one?
So I wrote Your Turn for Care, Surviving the Aging and Death of the Adults Who Harmed You, which is for survivors dealing with that topic. And people read it and they liked it and it was helpful. And they said, well, what about the relationships we're having now? And I thought, okay. So I wrote another book. And that book is about figuring out how to have the best quality, emotionally meaningful relationships, which means not just intimate romantic, but also intimate emotionally. Work relationships, relationships with your kids, relationships with yourself. And my clients were my inspirations. Several of them read the book in draft form and told me things to include, particularly the trigger warning in the introduction that says this book is going to bring stuff up for you. Read it slowly, put it down. Don't try to do it in one sitting. That was wisdom that came from several people. And so that was how that book happened, is a combination of the feedback from Your Turn and the people with whom I was working. And it's something I'm excited about because there's a lot of how to have good relationship books out there. Few of them have been trauma informed. Mm-hmm. And that's what this book is. And you don't have to have had, criterion A trauma. This is for people with attachment trauma and people whose parents were highly narcissistic or mentally ill and neglectful, or substance abusers, as well as parents who did horrible, terrible, criminal things to their children. Mm-hmm. So it's about that range of experience as it affects attachment relationships and a person's capacity to get what they want as adults.
So Not the Price of Admission, Healthy Relationships After Childhood Trauma. I'll have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Laura, you are awesome, man. I love talking to you. There are, when I think of this podcast and what I'm aspiring to do, you and what you embody and what you stand for really I exemplify what I'm aspiring to communicate on this podcast. So I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm so grateful for the work you do, Guy, because getting the word out to people and encouraging people to talk about their work is essential for the kind of therapy that we all attempt to practice. So thanks to you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, we'll talk soon. Take care.
And you too. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, this episode is sponsored by Trauma Therapist 2.0, community to educate, support, to inspire new trauma healers. If you're a new trauma worker, new trauma provider and healer, you're starting out on this trauma-informed journey and you're tired of doing this alone and looking for support, looking to be around a community of other passionate trauma clinicians, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 at traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist2.com.